John Deere announced it is laying off nearly 120 employees at a facility in Ankeny. The layoffs impact workers at John Deere Des Moines Works.
When you think of farming equipment, one name likely comes to mind: John Deere. For decades, this iconic company has been a staple in American agriculture. Farmers everywhere relied on John Deere's tractors, harvesters, and plows to get the job done. But in recent years, John Deere made a bold move that sent shockwaves through the farming industry, resulting in a massive $34.05 billion loss for U.S. agriculture. How did this happen? How did one company's decision manage to wipe out billions of dollars from the U.S. farming economy? Stick around to find out. The bold move. For many years, John Deere was the gold standard in farming machinery. Farmers trusted the brand because it stood for durability, innovation, and a deep understanding of the needs of agriculture. Founded in 1837 by John Deere himself, the company grew from a small blacksmith shop in Moline, Illinois, to a global leader in agricultural equipment. Over the years, John Deere didn't just sell tractors. It shaped the future of farming. It was the company that introduced the first self-scouring steel plow, making it easier for farmers to till the soil. It developed heavy-duty tractors that could withstand the toughest farming conditions, and it didn't stop there. John Deere continually innovated, improving its equipment with technology, precision farming tools, and automation. By the 20th century, John Deere had become so deeply embedded in the American farming culture that it was hard to imagine a farm without a green and yellow tractor parked nearby. Farmers didn't just see John Deere as a business. They saw it as a partner that helped them grow their crops, harvest their fields, and sustain their livelihoods. But this reliability came at a cost. While John Deere was known for its durable and high-quality machines, they were also expensive. And as time passed, those prices kept rising. In recent years, something started changing. The farming industry began to shift dramatically. The world was facing unprecedented challenges, from climate change to rising global competition. Farmers everywhere were struggling to keep up, and the pressure on the farming industry became unbearable. But the real challenge for John Deere came from a different direction. As farming became more expensive, the price of equipment also soared. Smaller, independent farms were starting to feel the squeeze. It was no longer just about having the right machinery. It was about being able to afford it. Farmers who once relied on John Deere's powerful machines were now questioning whether they could justify the cost. The company's premium pricing structure began to feel like a barrier. Small and medium-sized farms simply couldn't keep up with the rising costs, and many were forced to turn to more affordable options from other companies. At the same time, big agribusinesses, the large corporations with massive resources, had the financial power to continue investing in expensive equipment. They could afford John Deere's high-end machines. So, while John Deere still maintained strong relationships with the corporate giants, its connection with smaller farmers started to fade. And that's where the trouble began. Everything came to a head when John Deere made a decision that shocked the entire farming community. The CEO of John Deere, in a bold and risky move, decided to raise prices for their equipment once again. This wasn't just a small price hike. It was massive.
Deere and Company announced it expects its net profits to remain at $7 billion for 2024. It's the first quarter this year. The company has not lowered that estimate despite a decline in sales,
pushing the cost of farming equipment beyond the reach of many smaller farmers. What was Deere thinking? Became the question on everyone's mind. The decision was seen as a direct hit to the backbone of American agriculture. These farmers weren't just customers. They were loyal supporters, some of whom had trusted John Deere for generations. Now, it felt like the company was turning its back on them in favor of the big corporations. The backlash was immediate. Independent farmers, already struggling with the costs of operating their farms, found themselves caught between a rock and a hard place. That's not all. They couldn't afford the new prices, but without the machinery, they couldn't keep up with the demands of modern farming. Deere's decision didn't just alienate these farmers. It opened the door for competitors to swoop in. Kubota and other brands quickly seized the opportunity to offer more affordable, repair-friendly machines.
They spent thousands of dollars on tractors, combines, and the like, but for years, John Deere manufacturers told farmers they didn't have the right to make their own repairs on their purchases.
These competitors were now able to offer solutions that John Deere simply could not, and many farmers began to consider switching brands. The struggle to innovate. The CEO of John Deere had wiped out the trust and loyalty of millions of farmers, and as a result, the company's grip on the farming industry started to loosen. The $34.05 billion loss didn't come overnight. Rather, it was the result of years of decisions that ignored the needs of the very people who had once made John Deere a household name. As news spread about John Deere's controversial price hike, the industry quickly realized the consequences were far-reaching. The price increase wasn't just a bad decision. It was a warning sign for the future of farming in the U.S.
It is a problem that's been plaguing America's farmers. The tractors, planters, and other gear they rely on can sometimes break down. But in many cases, they're not able or even permitted to make repairs, even on equipment they own.
The $34.05 billion loss was felt across the country. But perhaps the hardest hit were the small and mid-sized farms that had long relied on John Deere's equipment. How could Deere do this to us? Farmers across America lamented. The frustration wasn't just about the higher prices. It was about feeling abandoned by a brand they had trusted for decades. Many farmers shared stories of using John Deere equipment that had been passed down through generations. What did they say? Keep watching to find out. This wasn't just about machinery. It was about a legacy of farming, family, and tradition. With John Deere no longer the affordable option, many farmers found themselves turning to alternatives. Kubota and other companies offered products that not only cost less, but also came with more flexible repair policies. Unlike John Deere, these competitors weren't making it harder to fix their equipment. Farmers didn't have to sign contracts or wait for approval to perform basic repairs. This simple shift in how businesses treated their customers was beginning to change the game.
There's a lot of uncertainties in business, especially with farming. I'm just gonna have to take it a day at a time and see what I can do. And with all these new advancements in technology, it seems like it's gonna make it a lot easier so I can have more efficiency, less downtime, and in the long run, more time with my daughter.
Meanwhile, John Deere's competitors were busy adjusting their marketing strategies. They didn't have the long legacy of John Deere, but they knew how to tap into the growing dissatisfaction among farmers. Through word of mouth, online reviews, and even targeted social media campaigns, these brands were attracting more customers every day. It wasn't just about price, it was about trust, and in this case, trust was priceless. As John Deere faced mounting backlash, it became clear that the company had to adapt or risk fading into irrelevance. Farmers were no longer looking solely for powerful, durable machines. They were looking for machines that could help them survive in a world full of unpredictable weather, shifting markets, and a shrinking workforce. The climate crisis was knocking on farming's door. Extreme weather events were becoming more frequent. Wildfires in California, flooding in the Midwest, and droughts across the South were taking a toll on crops and farmland.
The recent storms have certainly put a dent in the drought, but they've also flooded precious farmland, ruining mile after mile of crops up and down the state. But even at farms that haven't flooded, they're still having a hard time harvesting.
These weren't just isolated incidents anymore. These were the new normal, and farmers needed equipment that could handle the worst. Deere's machinery was still seen as the best when it came to power and durability, but there was a growing gap in its ability to adapt to these new challenges. Farmers began to realize that their investment in high-end equipment wasn't paying off if it couldn't help them deal with floods or droughts. We need machines that can work in these extreme conditions, not just machines that look good on the field, a frustrated farmer said. This is where John Deere's struggle to innovate began to show. While other companies were investing heavily in climate-resilient technology and more efficient machinery, Deere's focus remained on the premium market. And while big agribusinesses with deep pockets could afford to pay the hefty price tags, smaller farms, those that were most vulnerable to the challenges of climate change, were left to fend for themselves. As farming was evolving, so were the economic realities for John Deere. The company's machines had always been known for their power, longevity, and reliability. But there was a catch: the price. John Deere's premium pricing was starting to hurt its reputation and its market share. While large-scale agribusinesses had the financial means to buy John Deere's high-end equipment, smaller farmers were finding it harder and harder to justify the steep prices. The ultimate test for John Deere's future. Over the past few decades, there has been a noticeable trend towards the consolidation of farms. Big agribusinesses, with their deep pockets and vast resources, were buying up small family farms. These massive corporations could afford to purchase Deere's equipment in bulk and keep it running without much financial strain. But the small, family-owned farms that had once been the backbone of the agricultural industry were quickly disappearing. In their place were corporate farming giants, owning vast swathes of land and growing even larger. For Deere, this was both an opportunity and a challenge. The large agri-businesses were a stable source of revenue. They could keep buying Deere's high-end machinery and maintain long-term contracts, ensuring steady profits. Yet, this trend presented a significant risk for John Deere. With fewer small farms left, Deere faced the possibility of losing touch with the very community that helped it grow. And as the land continued to be bought up by large corporations, the price of farmland soared, making it even harder for newcomers or smaller farmers to enter the market. That's a lot to unpack. This meant that Deere had to make a tough choice.
You know, we have employees and customers in over 130 countries. We have operations located in around 30 countries where we have factories and offices.
Would it continue to prioritize its relationships with large agribusinesses? Or would it shift its focus back to the small farmers who had always been the heart of the company? For the family-owned farms that had once driven the industry, John Deere's prices were becoming a barrier, not a benefit. And the problem wasn't just the upfront costs. Deere had been notorious for its repair restrictions. If a farmer's equipment broke down, they were forced to take it to an authorized Deere service center, often at steep costs and long wait times. For small farmers with tight margins, this became an insurmountable challenge. It wasn't just about buying a machine anymore. It was about keeping it running. In fact, the growing frustration among farmers led to a backlash that was hard to ignore. John Deere is pricing itself out of the market, said one industry analyst. And it wasn't just the farmers feeling the pinch. Deere's failure to adapt to the changing market was beginning to alienate loyal customers who had long trusted the brand. For John Deere to stay relevant, it had to rethink its approach. The pressure was mounting. Farming has changed forever. With rising competition, shrinking profit margins, labor shortages, political pressure, and the harsh realities of climate change, John Deere was in the midst of a perfect storm.
We've seen lots of changes in trade, lots of changes in political issues come up throughout the years. One of the things we've tried to do is focus on what we can control.
The company that had once been the undisputed leader in agricultural machinery was now facing an existential crisis of its own making. For years, John Deere had been a symbol of American farming innovation. From its early days of steam-powered engines to its more recent advancements in precision farming technologies, John Deere had always been quick to adapt. The company's reputation for producing durable, high-quality equipment had been challenged. As new players entered the market with smarter, more adaptable technologies, John Deere faced the very real possibility of losing its long-held position at the top. The shift toward automation, precision farming, and data-driven decision-making had reshaped the industry, and John Deere needed to catch up fast. But perhaps the biggest challenge of all was the company's strained relationship with its customers. The right to repair controversy, along with John Deere's high prices and complex maintenance systems, had left many loyal farmers frustrated. As a result, many were looking for alternatives from other brands that offered more affordable and accessible solutions. The loyalty that John Deere once enjoyed was now being tested in the harshest of ways. The stakes were higher than ever. With global competition intensifying, climate change reshaping farming practices, and labor shortages becoming more pronounced, the future of John Deere and of the entire U.S. farming industry is uncertain. In the coming years, John Deere's ability to innovate, adjust its business model, and remain relevant in an increasingly competitive market would determine whether it would thrive or falter. What do you think? Can John Deere adapt to the future of farming, or will it become another relic of a bygone era? Let us know in the comments section. We hope you enjoyed watching this video. Remember to like, share it, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.
Some cases, that might be an outcome where if we have a market that is in, very difficult financial conditions.
It was an ordinary day until the news broke. John Deere, known for its iconic green tractors, announced he was shifting part of its manufacturing to Mexico. For many, these tractors were more than machines. They were what kept their farms alive. The news quickly caught the attention of President Donald Trump, who wasted no time expressing his anger. What followed was a fiery back and forth between Trump and John Deere. As the battle grew, so did the tension. Can John Deere survive this storm? Will Trump's threats be enough to stop them? Keep watching because you're in for a shocker. John Deere's bold move. John Deere shocked the world by pushing back against Trump's attacks over moving his production to another country. But this wasn't just a statement of disagreement. No, this was a threat. What really happened between John Deere and President Donald Trump that prompted the company to leave the United States in the first place? John Deere's decision wasn't something that happened overnight. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment idea. It was calculated. For months, the company had been under pressure to modernize its operations, and like many big companies, John Deere faced the need to cut costs and stay competitive on the global stage. Moving some production to Mexico seemed like a smart business move, one that would save money and increase profits, but as soon as the news hit the airwaves, all hell broke loose. Why did this move strike such a nerve? Well, Trump didn't see it as just a business decision. He saw it as a betrayal. In his eyes, John Deere, a company that had deep roots in American soil, was turning its back on the very people who made it successful, the American worker. Trump, known for his strong America First stance, wasn't about to let this slide. So what did he do? He didn't just take a deep breath and let it go. No, instead, he went on the attack. Trump's response was quick and harsh. He called out John Deere in public, accusing them of being unpatriotic and saying that they were doing nothing more than running away from their responsibilities to American workers.
I just noticed behind me John Deere tractors. I know a lot about John Deere. I love the company, but as you know, they've announced a few days ago that they're going to move a lot of their manufacturing business to Mexico. I'm just notifying John Deere right now.
As the rhetoric grew louder, something even bigger was about to happen. John Deere wasn't going to stay quiet. In fact, the company made a surprising move that few saw coming. They fired back, not with silence or avoidance, but with a statement that shocked everyone. John Deere threatened Trump. Trump's administration had been focused on prioritizing U.S. manufacturing, jobs, and economic growth, especially in industries like agriculture. A move towards more environmentally friendly practices was seen as a potential disruption to the economy and jobs he believed were essential to America's success. Trump had always been vocal about his stance on climate change. He denied its impact and rolled back many of the environmental regulations put in place by previous administrations. To him, John Deere's push for sustainability was a slap in the face to American workers and businesses. And that's when things got ugly. Trump's response was swift, and it was fierce. He didn't hold back. In a flurry of tweets, statements, and speeches, he began attacking John Deere, calling them out for what he believed was a betrayal of the American worker. He argued that companies should prioritize growth and jobs over environmental concerns. John Deere painted them as elitists, more concerned with appeasing environmentalists than securing America's future. But Trump's response went beyond words. He used his influence to try to change public opinion, positioning John Deere as a company that was losing touch with the real America. He painted a picture of a nation where companies like John Deere were abandoning their core principles, choosing to chase the trends of the global elite instead of standing up for the hard-working American family. Trump's insults were not just about John Deere. They were a message to every corporation in the U.S. He wanted to remind everyone that if you crossed him, you would feel the consequences. As the issue intensified, John Deere found themselves in the eye of the storm. The public debate had shifted from business strategy to a full-blown political war. People began to take sides. Some sided with Trump, arguing that John Deere was abandoning its roots and putting profits over the American people. Others stood behind John Deere, praising the company for its bold move and commitment to the environment. But for John Deere, the stakes were much higher than just public opinion. They had a future to protect, and they weren't about to back down. John Deere's leadership didn't sit back quietly, letting Trump's accusations fly unchecked. They decided to make their position clear, and they did it with force. John Deere's threat wasn't a typical corporate move. It was a bold statement about what the company stood for. The message was simple. If Trump continued down this path of confrontation, John Deere might pull back some of its operations, or worse, lose its trust in the American government. The battle John Deere didn't expect. When John Deere made their threat, it didn't take long for Donald Trump to respond, and this time, he wasn't holding back. Trump, known for his unfiltered remarks and quick reactions, lashed out at the company with a fury that no one could have predicted. He took to social media first, calling out John Deere for its disloyalty and accusing them of undermining American values. Trump, who always prided himself on being a defender of American businesses, was furious that a company, especially one so deeply ingrained in the country's farming culture, would publicly challenge his authority. Trump's response wasn't just words. His team immediately began laying the groundwork for a potential campaign to punish John Deere for their stance.
Not only will we stop our businesses from leaving for foreign lands, but under my leadership, we are going to take other countries' jobs.
This would involve targeting their operations, pressuring local governments to reconsider contracts with the company, and even introducing policies that could severely impact John Deere's bottom line. At a rally in western Pennsylvania, the former president declared that if John Deere moved forward with its plan to increase production in Mexico, he would impose a 200% tariff on all the company's products entering the United States. This was no idle threat.
We're going to move a lot of their manufacturing business to Mexico. I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States.
Trump, a vocal critic of companies moving their manufacturing overseas, has repeatedly stated his intention to hit automakers with severe tariffs for shifting production to Mexico. But this time, he directed his wrath toward a major player in the agricultural sector, John Deere, a company synonymous with American farming equipment. Trump's warning came after John Deere's announcement earlier that year that they were laying off hundreds of workers in the Midwest while ramping up production in Mexico. The news stirred up anger among workers and political leaders alike. Many felt betrayed by a company that had long been a symbol of American manufacturing. These decisions were not just seen as corporate moves. They were seen as an attack on American workers and the heart of the nation's agricultural industry. Trump's strong words rattled the stock market, with shares in John Deere dipping by more than 1.5% in after-hours trading, following a modest 0.75% increase earlier in the day. It wasn't just a financial blow, it was a public challenge. Trump's tariffs were a signature element of his economic agenda, and now they were being aimed at one of America's most iconic agricultural equipment manufacturers. This was the first time Trump had threatened such severe tariffs on John Deere, though he had previously voiced similar threats to automakers. His message was clear. If American companies moved jobs overseas, they would face heavy consequences, whether they were building cars or tractors. And while John Deere did not immediately respond to his comments, the ripple effects were already being felt. For Trump, this move wasn't just about John Deere or even the economy. It was a larger statement about what he believed to be the erosion of American manufacturing. His supporters, particularly in rural America, saw him as the defender of American workers, standing up to corporate giants like John Deere that they believed were betraying the very communities that had supported them for decades. As Trump raged on, his supporters echoed his frustration, flooding social media with messages of loyalty to the former president and anger toward the company. It wasn't just a political spat anymore. It was becoming a battle of ideologies, with John Deere and Trump standing on opposite sides. The situation was quickly spiraling out of control. Both sides were now at war, and it seemed like there was no turning back. John Deere's strategic move. John Deere wasn't just reacting impulsively. Their decision to go head-to-head with Trump was rooted in something much deeper than a political quarrel. Behind the scenes, John Deere's leadership had been quietly planning a shift in strategy, one that embraced environmental sustainability, technological innovation, and the future of farming. For John Deere, the need to adapt to the changing world was clear. The agriculture industry was evolving rapidly, and the focus was shifting from just producing more crops to doing so in a way that was environmentally responsible. The farming world was changing, and John Deere knew that if they wanted to remain a dominant force in the industry, they had to evolve too. The company had already been investing heavily in green technologies, like eco-friendly tractors and sustainable farming tools, hoping to position themselves as leaders in this new age of agriculture. But the public response to their actions was much more mixed than they had anticipated. Many farmers were still loyal to John Deere, not just for their quality equipment, but for their long-standing role in American farming culture. These farmers had been using John Deere tractors for decades, passing them down from generation to generation. It was more than just business. It was about tradition and trust. But John Deere understood that to survive in the long term, they had to balance this loyalty with the pressing demands of a changing world. This was about the future, and they knew they had to make bold moves, whether it was controversial or not. Their stance against Trump wasn't just about politics. It was about standing up for the future of farming and the planet. By pushing for more sustainable farming practices, they were sending a message that they were committed to the next generation of agriculture. They weren't going to let political pressure dictate their future, but did their strategy work? Environmentalists and young activists rallied behind the company, praising them for standing firm in the face of political pressure. They believed that John Deere's commitment to sustainability was not just about the environment, but also about the future of the planet. This division wasn't just online. It extended into everyday conversations, as people in small-town cafes and urban coffee shops debated who was right. The debate wasn't just about corporate power versus political influence. It was about values, about what kind of America people wanted to live in, and what role businesses should play in shaping that future. Even farmers, the heart of John Deere's customer base, found themselves caught in the middle. For older generations who had spent their entire careers working with John Deere equipment, the company represented reliability, tradition, and a history of helping farmers grow. But younger farmers, many of whom were more attuned to modern farming practices and concerned about the environment, saw things differently. They understood that the future of farming was inseparable from environmental sustainability, but some questioned whether it was driven more by corporate interests than by genuine concern for the planet. John Deere and Trump's heated interaction is more than just about business or politics. It's about how companies and politicians shape the future. It shows the delicate balance between corporate power, political influence, and the everyday lives of Americans. So, what do you think about the John Deere and Trump drama? Was it a necessary clash of ideologies or just a storm in a teacup? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, click the following video on your screen and you will enjoy it.